You're listening to the Sticks in the Six podcast. Here are your co-hosts, Andrew Forbes, Peter Barricini, and Alex Hobson.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 129 of Sticks in the Six. As always, I'm your host, Andrew Forbes, here with my co-hosts, Alex and Peter. Boys, lots to talk about on the Leaf front, a little bit of draft recap, a little free agency recap. But first of all, as always, how you guys doing this week? Alex, we'll throw it to you first.
Doing good, man. The draft honestly feels like it was a month ago. I feels like we've lived through an entire off season in these past couple days. So I'm looking forward to chatting with our London Knights buddy over here. We'll bring him on soon to chat about the Leafs' first round pick and maybe talk some fans off the ledge. But overall, things are going well. I'm going to see Weezer in Toronto with my brother tonight, so just hanging out, waiting to do that. He's a much bigger fan than I am. He's one of those fans that knows everything they did front to back. I just know the hits, but it's going to be a good show anyways. So yeah, we're looking forward to that, and we're looking forward to chatting some hockey before that. So.
As you mentioned, we do have Kyle Grimard from the London Knights. He's with the London Knights, but he has his own podcast as well with Mike Stubbs, so be sure to check that out. We'll bring him on in just a minute here, but before we do, Peter, you're back from Nashville, buddy, and I saw that nice little Jack Daniels gift basket you guys got. So how was that, buddy?
Unfortunately, it was only given to select members of the media. But good news is Mark Shea was able to get a bottle. So that is a very good sign. I'm hoping that that bottle is probably gone at this point, but it was a nice bottle for the 25th anniversary for the Preds. Again, a little disappointed, but that's all good. Nashville itself overall was just a party and a half. Like, no matter where you were, there was always something going on until 3 a.m. in the morning. And right when I was coming back home, when I left my hotel room at 3 a.m., people were leaving the bars at 3 a.m. and the party was still going on. So yeah, draft was a success. It was great. It was fun. It definitely was an experience I'll never forget. And Alex, let me know if they play Hash Pipe tonight, because when I saw them with Blink-182 years ago, that was the very first song that they played.
Oh, I'm sure they'll play Hash Pipe. I'm sure they'll lead off right with it. Did you get to sit in with Brad Paisley and play some drums when you're in Nashville, or what?
Unfortunately, no. I couldn't get a hold of Brad. Brad, if you're out there listening, if you missed me, hook me up. I'm a drummer in the waiting in the wings right now.
Well, next time you'll find him on Broadway, Brad. But until then, as Alex mentioned, we've got Kyle coming on here. But before we do, just a quick word from our presenting sponsors, Indie Ale House. The off season is back. The draft is done, and free agency is in full wind. Getting ready for a night out or watching some of that hockey content at home with the gang. What better way to do it than with a nice cold one from the folks at Indie Ale House in Toronto? With 2 locations in the city, at Italy, Toronto, at Bay and Bloor, the Biroteca location. They have 2 big screens, amazing authentic Italian food, and loads of beer. Also at OG Brew Pub in the Junction at Keele and Dundas with 120 seats, famous bar food, and 12 taps. Indie Ale House is an award-winning brewery featuring their flagship Instigator IPA and dozens of rotating monthly special release beers. Perfect for takeout, dine-in, or bottle shop online orders when planning for a game night. You can find Instigator IPA and Marco Polo Pilsner at finer LCBOs across the province as well. Hashtag Live Indie is the motto. Adventurous, fun-focused beers with a selection for everyone, from a healthy dose of in-your-face hoppy beers for the beer geeks to mainstream Pilsners and easy drinking options. Indie Ale House is the go-to for game day. So as we mentioned, bringing Kyle on to the broadcast here. Kyle, welcome to Sticks in the Six. You're our London Knights insider, and as a Leaf podcast, obviously, London Knights is the talk of the town after that round 1 draft pick. So, Kyle, welcome to Sticks in the Six. How are you doing, buddy?
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. Really good. I got about half a dozen messages once the Easton Cowan pick was made. Everyone's trying to get the insight on, on the player, on the team, and it's I'm really rooting for the kid. I think that's one of the biggest attributes is that he's a guy that you want to root for. He's a guy that you want to succeed, and he kind of brings a lot of elements that I think the Leafs have been looking for over the last few years. So it's going to be really exciting for him, and I'm proud of the kid.
Well, Kyle, sorry, Andrew, I just wanted to real quick before we get into the interview and talk about Cowan and talk about the Knights and talk about everything. I just want to give you an opportunity to plug where you come from and all the stuff that you do. I know this isn't our first time chatting on a podcast. Maybe you want to mention your pod.
Yeah, no, Alex and I, we've chatted a few times. I do a podcast with Mike Stubbs, who's the voice of the London Knights on 980 CFPL. It's called Night Shift. We just started it this past season, and it's a lot of fun. I know a lot of people that start different projects and whatnot, and it takes a while for an organization and for a team to get to a level. And it was fun that in our first season, the Knights went all the way to the OHL championships against the Peterborough Petes and saw a lot of growth, a lot of players really come into their own this season. So it's on any network that you want: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I think it's Amazon Prime as well. Night Shift with Kyle Grimard and Mike Stubbs. And then, Pierre, I just heard you were in Nashville. I do a morning show for Country 104 in London, Ontario. So I was following that draft pretty closely and seeing all the different acts, whether it was Mitchell Tenpenny, it was Dirks Bentley, the NHL award. So that was really cool to see over the last little bit.
Well, Kyle, I think there was a lot of conversation going into the NHL draft about the Leafs and what they were going to do with that number or that first round pick. Obviously, there was some consideration that if Oliver Bonk falls that far, maybe they go after Oliver Bonk. Instead, they go after a different London Knight, one that's a little bit smaller than Bonk was, but certainly a guy that has a lot of talent. And as you mentioned this year, a lot of growth from Easton Cowan. Give us the rundown on what makes Easton Cowan a great first round pick for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Well, what's funny too is he started the year at the junior B level. So he had to come up from that level just to get with the London Knights organization. When he was first drafted, he kind of got a glimpse of what it was going to be like in the OHL. And I think the one thing immediately that I noticed from game one was the stage wasn't too big for him, even as a rookie. That season, obviously with the COVID conditions and everything, a lot of guys weren't able to get that full experience in. So when he came into this past season, he was kind of starting behind a lot of players who had a lot more experience, whether it's George Diaco, who was the co-captain. Sean McGurn had already been there and played with a year with Antonio Stranges and Luke Evangelista, who's a second-round pick of the Nashville Predators. And all he did all year was earn Dale Hunter's trust and respect. I mean, this is a guy who played in every element of the game. He was working on their number one power play unit at times. He was one of their best penalty killers. There's a shift, I believe it's in the second round against the Sarnia Sting, or in the third round against the Sting, where he controls the puck for about 1 minute and 15 seconds on his own, and he's fighting off 3 or 4 Sting players at a time, so he can do it at both ends. He's out when you're down a goal. He's on the ice when you're up a goal. So he kind of does a little bit of everything. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize was his second half of the season wasn't just the playoffs. Over the last 50 games played that he played, he scored 50 points. He had 29 in the final 30 regular season games and then 21 points in 20 games in the playoffs. And I think only 2 or 3 nights outscored him in that time frame. He was also playing through an illness in the OHL championships. There's everything you want to like about this player. And the 2 things that he mentioned that he wanted to get better at this offseason: 1, he wants to get bigger. He understands that he can put on a little bit of weight. He's probably going to grow an inch or 2 as well, but he's also looking to get bigger, and he wants to develop his shot even more, which I already think is an NHL shot.
Kyle, you've already kind of touched on his strengths and what kind of a player he is. And I'll tell you, my favorite tradition after every NHL draft that the Leafs take part in is going through the comment sections and seeing all the people who were born in, not to generalize, but born in the 50s or the 60s, etc. Singling out the fact that their new prospect is 5'10", 5'11". Oh, they drafted another small player. They drafted another short skill that they need grit, all that, all the talking points. So for people out there who see that Easton Cowan is 5'10" or 5'11" or whatever he is, and just assume that he's this little, short skilled prospect that, is going to get knocked around when he gets to the NHL, what do you have to say to those people?
Well, I mean, it's easy to look at those metrics and assume that he doesn't go into the corners. He's not physical. He doesn't battle. And all you've got to do is watch. And those guys that you're talking about, Alex, or probably have never watched a shift of Easton Cowan in their lives. But all he does is, he's the energy bug. He was on a line with Ryan Winterton, who is an NHL draft pick of the Seattle Kraken, and Denver Barkey, and they made up the Twinterton line, which was covetedly named. It was the best line in the OHL playoffs. And he was the guy that was getting the pucks. He was retrieving it. He was battling. He was throwing his body around. He was driving to the front of the net. And all I can say is that, a guy like that in the OHL finals, he missed game 3 due to an illness. Him and Denver Barkey, they were sorely missed, and they ended up losing that game. They returned for game 4, and all he did was a minute and 30 seconds in is open the scoring by hustling in on the forecheck, beating a defender to the puck, out-muscling him, driving to the front of the net and scoring. And if those aren't intangibles that you want in a first-round pick or in a player in general, I don't know what is. And I think he's got every element to be, a regular NHLer. And I think you just got to go back and not just the highlight tapes, but especially this season, you assume that the London Knights are going to be heavily featured, whether it's television programs or whatever station that they're going to be on, because of the media coverage with Easton Cowan being a first-round pick of the Leafs. And once you start watching what he does on the ice, I think people are going to grow to appreciate what he brings and what he'll bring that the Leafs don't already have.
Kyle, you're already talking about like Cowan's game, and even during the media scrum availability, Cowan was talking about his hounding mentality, getting in on the forecheck, chasing pucks, being that, kind of tenacious player that, the Maple Leafs have been going in that direction even with free agency right now. Given how he plays with that mindset, obviously, a lot of fans were saying that, they probably should have taken players with higher upside, like a Gavin Brindley, smaller players, same energy, but a little bit more production. Obviously, points is not the biggest thing. Considering that he had, 53 points this season, is that an indicator where, points are off the table and his work ethic, mindset, and drive was the most important thing for the Leafs?
Well, I mean, you can look at it that way. I'll look at it as another London Knight who exploded after his draft year. Luke Evangelista, a guy I mentioned earlier, his rookie year, he did not score a single goal for the London Knights. He was a second-round selection in the OHL priority selection, and all he did his next year, in his draft year, was he put up 22 goals, I believe, and about 61 points. He ended up going in the second round of the Nashville Predators. His following year, when he came back to London, he led the OHL in goals with 55 and 111 points. So the jump that Nashville saw that he was going to make was significant. I'm not saying that Easton Cowan is going to have that kind of jump where he's going to lead the OHL in goals and he's going to put up 115 points, but from a 20-goal scorer, it's not going to surprise me if Easton Cowan goes back to London this past season. One, I won't be surprised if he's the captain, because that's the kind of attitude that he brings to the team. And that's what I think the Hunters really see in a guy like that. But I also can see him making a jump where he's a 30, 35 goal scorer and he'll push 80, 85 points. And he'll be a guy that's leaned on in almost every aspect of the game. And it's just going to make him a better overall player. The Hunters don't put players in positions they don't think they're ready for, or they don't think that they can challenge. And I think we've seen that with a lot of players with the London Knights. At least I have over the last few years with Luke Evangelista, who was a massive penalty killing player. We saw players, even in past that, Evan Bouchard, they don't really show playing time, but in the playoffs, Evan Bouchard was playing probably 35 minutes a game. Like, he was a horse for the London Knights. But the Hunters wouldn't have done that with him unless they knew he could handle it. And I think we're going to see a lot more responsibility given to Easton Cowan in all aspects of the game. And I think he's going to take it and go with it, because he's not a guy who he's not going to go back and go, oh, I'm a first round pick, I've got that pedigree, it's no big deal. He's going to wear it and he's going to earn it every single day. I think that's one of the best qualities he has.
I'm glad you brought up what the Hunters provide for these guys, because coming out of the combine, I spoke to each of the Knights that were attended the combine, and spoke to them about what the London Knights do for them as an organization, preparing them for the next level, preparing them for steps in their career, like the combine, like the draft. And it's very evident what the London Knights do in terms of preparing these guys. I mean, just look at the history of this organization and what they've provided for the NHL. You go back and you look at names like Max Domi. I mean, look at the Leafs alone: Max Domi, John Tavares, Mitch Marner, now Easton Cowan. What do you see from the London Knights that prepares these guys for the next level in terms of, taking that next step and having that kind of class A personality to be a difference maker.
Well, I think they're a lot more hands-on than a lot of people who don't follow the organization realize. I mean, Mark Hunter on game days is walking around the building. He's not sitting up in the suites just observing. He is walking around. He's talking to all of the, he's talking to players who aren't playing in that game, guys who are scratched, underage guys who, to NCAA terms, they're almost redshirting their rookie years and not playing, but they're getting a sense of the culture. They're getting a sense of how things go over there. But I also just think that with the Hunters, they just do they do a really good job at understanding the player types and the culture that they want coming in. And a really underrated part of what they do is if they recognize that maybe a player's not working out, they try to find a situation or a place where they can go and thrive. Guys like Sahil Panwar, who didn't necessarily get top 6 minutes here in London, they make a trade and send him over to the Hamilton Bulldogs, and Sahil Panwar all of a sudden becomes a top 6 player. He gets bigger playing minutes, he gets a bigger role, and he starts producing over there. So as much flack as maybe you want to think the Hunters get, working with the London Knights and being owners and all, they buy their scouting and they bring play, like there's all these fun rumors that you love hearing about, but they really do a good job at putting the players in the best position, whether it's with the organization or not. But I think they identify which guys they want part of their culture to continue on. The guys that you mentioned, guys like Nazem Kadri's and Mitch Marner's and Matthew Tkachuk's, and a legacy that gets, that they have to carry on with so many incredible players. And I think they really do their due diligence in making sure that legacy is being handed off to the right guys.
I think that's a very strong point that you make, because, speaking as somebody who grew up as a fan of the childhood rival of the London Knights, the Kitchener Rangers, don't get me wrong. I love the Odd. I've had lots of great memories at the Odd growing up, but nothing compares to Budweiser Gardens. I mean, you walk in there and you feel like you're walking into an NHL arena, and there is a different level of professionalism that I think players who go through that system kind of get groomed into, just because of the guys that they're around. And we sit here, we talk about Easton Cowan's game. As somebody who's been around the team as much as you have, and you spend a fair bit amount with the players and with people around the organization, is there anything you can tell us about Easton Cowan, the person, as opposed to just him as a player?
The one thing that really threw me off was I was able to, to talk with him and interview him in his very first game in the OHL. And he's still got the cage and everything. So he is a pure rookie at this point. And the level of almost maturation and sophistication that he had, and understanding the environment that he was in, the position that he was in, and he just wanted to play within his own game, but still have an impact. It did throw me for a loop a little bit, because that wasn't what I was expecting from a 16-year-old at the time. And now a couple years later, he's really come into his own. He's a very personable guy, but not to the extent where it's almost like cocky. He really likes getting everybody up to his level and engaged in the game. And he's always talking on the bench with whether it's Denver Barkey or whoever he's playing with, but he always seems to be going at 100%, which, a lot of nights in the OHL, it's easy to take nights off, whether you're playing a team and you're going to go into their barn and pump them 10-2 or 9-1 or whatever, and you can have a little bit of an off game. And he refused to have that. And no matter how difficult it got for them in the playoffs, he always came in and always found a way to produce. And I just think it's his mentality that, he understands, that even said in his post-draft interview that he was a little shocked. He was sitting up in the rafters, not expecting to hear his name called maybe on day one. But at the same time, that's not going to sway him or, make it feel like the spotlight's a little bit too big for him. He's going to go and improve himself literally every single day. And that's a kind of a perfect mentality you want going into the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Well, yeah, especially since with the signings the Leafs have made lately, especially, and I know I'm not comparing Easton Cowan and Ryan Reeves. I know that they are probably as different as players as you can get, but a big part of the reason they brought Ryan Reeves in is because he's a guy that's vocal. And, True Living comes in and says that he's a guy that's never spent time in the dressing room with the Leafs, but he says that the first vibe that he got was that it's a bit of a quiet room. And obviously when you have a captain like John Tavares, things are going to be a little bit quieter. He's one of the quietest guys in the league. So you have to wonder if maybe just in recent weeks with True Living taking over at the helm, that there's a flaw that he's identified in the room, and maybe Easton Cowan plays into that, because you're obviously not drafting a guy in the first round because he's vocal on the bench, but it had to have helped this case considering how far they reached to get him.
Well, and if you watch the Knights over the year too, they do a lot of dressing room videos where you go in and you see, the personalities in there. Max McHugh, who's a draft pick of the San Jose Sharks, is one of the more outgoing individuals, and he kind of set the tone along with co-captain Sean McGurn and George Diaco. And, that's again what I'm talking about, of guys passing on the tradition. The guys that are going to be carrying that are the Oliver Bonks and the Easton Cowans. Max McHugh might be back for one more season with the Knights, but that's the mentality and attitude that they've basically been in now for 2 to 3 years and will carry over into their NHL careers. And if you can carry any sort of that mentality over, I think it's never a bad thing. There is always a lot of voices in that locker room. There's a lot to live up to when you're a member of the London Knights. I know, Alex, you're a big Rangers fan, so it's probably tough to hear. I hear a lot of people. It's kind of the similar with the Leafs, right? Either you hate them or you love them. There's no in between with the Knights, but it's definitely that mentality. There it is. I like it.
Well, I'll tell you right now that I never got so into junior hockey to the point where I hate certain teams. Ask a couple of my buddies, and yeah, they're avid Knights haters, but I don't really, they're all kids. And I feel like with so much roster turnover every year, it's kind of hard to develop a hatred for a team, but I won't lie and say there's no envy for the Knights considering how routinely good they are. I mean, hell, they're the 96 Bulls of the OHL, if you want to call them that. So, yeah, overall, it's, if anything, I can put aside my jealousy and my envy of the Knights to recognize that Easton Cowan's coming through a pretty good system. So,
no, I agree as well.
Yeah, I just want to jump in quickly about obviously Easton said that he attributed his second half as a big reason for getting on the Maple Leafs radar. Even Wes Clark said that he had a strong second half, strong playoffs, rising into key moments. What did you notice in Cowan's game in the second half that elevated it to the point where you kind of got a sense that maybe his draft stock is improving tremendously?
The biggest thing was his confidence in understanding that, over the first half of the season, he was trying to figure out where he was going to fit within the roster, because the Knights had a really good roster last year and they brought over some older players to kind of fill some holes. You had Ryan Humphrey and Ryan Winterton, who were acquired in a trade about halfway through the year in January from the Hamilton Bulldogs. And Ryan Humphrey was kind of that same similar vibe where he's a menace. He's, physical, he's in your face, he's talking, but he can also score 20 goals. So that was tough. And then Ryan Winterton carries the pedigree of being a draft pick of the Seattle Kraken. You already had Sean McGurn, who rode shotgun with Evangelista and Stranges the year prior, who was going to be your number one center. You have Max McHugh, who had pedigree as a draft pick, and then the back end was just stacked with Oliver Bonk, who was a draft pick of the Flyers. You had Sam Dickinson, who's one of the best 16-year-olds I've ever seen on the back end. Brett Brochu was the goaltender of the year in the OHL. So it's hard for a younger guy who hasn't been drafted yet, who's trying to find his spot on the roster. And I think once Dale Hunter recognized that he could not only be a useful player, but thrive in the role that he had, I think he grabbed it and he never let go. And it got to the point where he was on the top line with Ryan Winterton and Denver Barkey, and they were carrying the Knights offense through the better part of the back half of the season and in the postseason. So I think the confidence thing, once that shot up and he knew that he was given that opportunity, he never let it go.
Would you agree too, Kyle, that for anybody who doesn't watch the Knights, the Hunters, as you mentioned, kind of put them in a position to succeed and force their hand a little bit in developing that confidence? Because if you're a younger player in the London Knights system right now, you don't get a lot of playing time. Dale Hunter's known for playing his big players for 25, 30 minutes a game. I mean, you go back to the day where they had Marner, Dvorak, and Tkachuk as a line, and those guys seem to never step off the ice. So would you agree that that's part of it too, is that coaching style is almost forces these players to find that confidence if they want to remain with that organization?
Well, that's exactly it. But, I want to be clear. The Hunters will never force a player into a situation. They will test them throughout the course of the season and see how they do. And if they think that they can handle that pressure, that's when they're given a little bit more leeway and they're given that range. Because like we said, the Knights had a draft pick last year by the name of Luca Testa. he never really found his footing, and he was involved in the trade with the Hamilton Bulldogs and sent him over for Ryan Winterton and Ryan Humphrey. So Hunter recognized immediately, Dale and Mark did, that, Testa wasn't necessarily going to be a player that was going to thrive, and they knew they were going to go on a deep run. And instead of trying to force him because he was a first round selection in the OHL priority selection, they didn't make it a thing. They understood right away that he wasn't going to fit the mold for what they wanted that season. And they ended up moving him and getting in a couple really, really important players for that run. So it's never a forced thing, but once you've earned the respect and trust of Mark and Dale Hunter, that's when they kind of put those players into those situations, because they've already been tested and they know that they can handle it.
I just looked up Luca Testa. Kid was born in 2006. That makes me feel old. My God, I'm a step younger than these other guys here. So the whole "I feel old" comments, they don't usually get received all that nicely. But I'm starting to see more and more players that are around my brother's age get drafted. It's like, God damn it, it's time.
Gets more painful and painful.
Oh yeah, yep. I'm fully aware.
I was about to say, I feel really old when that picture of Cowan in his Maple Leaf jersey was right behind the glass with Mitch Marner right then and there. That's how you know you're really old, because that was probably just 4 or 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden he's drafted into the Maple Leafs organization with Marner.
Yeah, my first photo of Mitch Marner is we played in a ball hockey tournament together in Burlington, Ontario, and I was still older than him and still am today. So.
Safe to say that's an important moment as well for a player like Easton Cowan, getting a phone call from or a text message from Mitch Marner right after he's drafted as well, eh?
Oh, huge. And yeah, I mean, he gets a FaceTime from Marner welcoming him to the team. And then not only that, but it just goes to show all the other former Leafs and current Leaf players. I mean, Nazem Kadri shot him a text message, and Kadri hasn't been with the team for years, but a lot of players hold that pedigree when you're drafted by the Knights. And, I know, Alex, you mentioned John Tavares. Don't mention to Oshawa Generals fans that he was a Knight ever, because that does never fly well. But there's a lot of respect for players like that. And when they go out of their way, it's an honor that you carry in the legacy with all of these other guys. And whether, could have been even Kachuk maybe mentioned, or Dvorak, but they understand what it means to come from that organization. So I think for Easton, watching Marner as a quote unquote kid, and then now getting a chance to potentially be a teammate of him, I think that's really special.
It'd be like if you told a Leafs fan that Matt Sundin was a Vancouver Canucks legend. I think that's
exactly
pretty similar situation there.
Well, I think I know the answer to this, but obviously, a first round pedigree, something that the London Knights pride themselves in. Who are we looking at through the pipeline right now in the London Knights organization that could be a future first round pick for an NHL team?
Without a doubt, it's Sam Dickinson on the back end. I mentioned it earlier. He was the 4th overall selection last year in the OHL priority selection of the Niagara Ice Dogs. And, there was some drama going on there, and he didn't really want to be a part of that organization. And London gave up quite a haul to get him. And I remember, seeing some highlights of him and understanding what he was going to be as a player. The first game I ever watched him play, I think he had 2 assists in the game. He set up, I think, Oliver Bonk for the Knights' first goal of the year. And as the year went on, he gained responsibilities within a top 4 that has Isaiah George, who's a selection of the New York Islanders, Logan Mailloux, who obviously comes with the pedigree and played a ton of minutes for the Knights, and then Oliver Bonk, who was going to be a selection this past year too. And all he did was earn himself a significant. He's the best 16-year-old I think I've seen live, and I haven't had a huge tenure of getting to watch junior hockey. I've got about 4 or 5 years, but he's hands down one of the best 16-year-olds I've seen. He will be a first-round pick this coming year.
Well, Kyle, I think we've taken up enough of your time, but let's make a deal. When Sam Dickinson goes in the first round next year, we'll bring you on again to discuss a little bit more London Knights.
God, I'm hoping it's to the Leafs too, because he would be a very welcome player to that team.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Kyle, again for joining us here on Sticks in the Six, and we look forward to having you back on at some point.
Yeah, thank you again, and as always, gentlemen, you enjoy.
Take it easy, Kyle.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Well, boys, I think it's safe to say that Kyle put some rest to that panic that Leafs Nation was experiencing after that 28th overall pick. But let's jump right into it with you guys. Peter, your thoughts on the Leafs taking Easton Cowan first round. A little bit of a leap when it comes to where you and I had him ranked in our final rankings.
Yeah, I had him in the 3rd round. I mean, obviously, and again, the second half did boost his stock up for me. That was a major one. But was it enough to put him in that second round contention? Don't know, because there were a lot of players that had probably better upside, like a Gavin Brindley, Grayson Sachin, Riley Height, who dropped to the just before the third round. Actually, there are a lot of players in there that I had my eye on for the Maple Leafs, and yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. But you know what? The Maple Leafs want character. They want work ethic. They want smarts. And Cowan has that consistently. I mean, yeah, I was watching a lot of Bonk and Barkey because they were the top names for the Knights for me. But Cowan stood out too. And he was the reason why he made my list. And yeah, it definitely was a shock. But at the same time, Wes Clark said that there were a bunch of teams after them that had Cowan still high on their list. So Maple Leafs didn't have a pick until the 5th round, unless they were able to trade down, which they weren't. Teams wanted to keep their picks because we know how deep of a draft this is. You might as well take your chance on a player that you have very high on your list and not let him fall and take somebody else and then probably regret it after. If they felt comfortable taking Cowan, you gotta respect that process, because they know what they're doing. They know what they're seeing. They know how to evaluate players, and Cowan definitely has the upside to take massive leaps forward. As Kyle said with Luke Evangelista, there's a possibility there. So bit of a surprise. I probably would have taken somebody else, but you can't deny the fact that this is somewhat of a pick that has a lot of potential, which is what the Maple Leafs did at the draft.
Alex, you're the same as me. You always get hyped up with some of the Leaf panic that exists on the socials. So your thoughts when the Leafs took Easton Cowan with the 28th pick overall?
Yeah, it's funny because during the draft, I hopped onto the little watch party that the Hockey Podcast Network was putting on just for the Leafs pick, just to talk Leafs a little bit and break down the pick when it happened. And as much as I regret it now, there was some obvious disappointment in my voice and on my face because I went in there thinking the Leafs are going to trade their pick. And then I see pick is in. I'm like, oh boy, okay, who's on the board still? There's Andrew Crystal still available. Gavin Brindley's still available. There's all these guys that are still available that could have been taken in the top 15, top 20. So I'm like, damn, this could be a real nice pick here. Riley Height was still on the board. And then, they were, they end up announcing the pick, and I hear Easton. Yeah, I hear East something. I'm like, what? And then I take my headphone off and I listen on my phone because my phone is a little bit behind, and I hear Easton Cowan selected. And I'm just like, okay. Well, that's a bit of a reach. I'm not sure if I like that pick. And I didn't really give a lot of analysis, and I was feeling a little dejected about the pick. I can't lie. But then I remembered, listen, I've barely watched Easton Cowan play. Maybe trust that the Leafs scouting staff knows what they're doing here. And, from that point on, I kept my mouth shut. I was like, okay, maybe this is a reach. Maybe they shouldn't have taken him in the first round. But I think once I realized that they were trying to trade down with that pick and they just couldn't find a trade that made sense for them where they'd feel comfortable grabbing Cowan, they just said screw it and just decided to take him there. In which case I can kind of understand that. That's understandable. So overall, I think it's you heard the glaring review that Kyle gave him. He is a great player, a lot of hustle. And I think that he's somebody, given what the Leafs, like I said to him, given what the Leafs have been trying to do with their dressing room and the types of players they try to bring in. First thing I hear about this kid is that he's got a nonstop motor. So I think that's gonna bode well for them in the future. And I am certainly excited to follow his progress next year because I do think he could take a big leap forward. Kyle mentioned that he was stuck on the depth chart behind a number of London's top players. And it kind of reminds me of the situation that Fraser Minson was in last year because he was playing for the Blazers and he had put up some impressive numbers, but he was playing behind the likes of Logan Stankoven and some other prospects, some other NHL drafted prospects on the Blazers. So sometimes all you need is to get a little bit of ice time and a little bit more responsibility to show what you can do. So I am looking forward to seeing what Cowan's able to do this year.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it for context on Twitter after the pick that I had him ranked 72nd in my final ranking. So it kind of gives you an idea of what where we saw Cowan going, and in fact I had Denver Barkey ahead of him as well in terms of London Knights in the draft as well. So, but I mean, like I said, we talked to him at the combine. Very well-spoken kid, very professional, really class act in terms of the way that he was answering questions, and definitely a guy that I could see, you know, living up to what it means to be a Toronto Maple Leaf, especially with the media coverage that you get here in Toronto. That said, I mean, anytime you've got a guy that's got 20 goals and 53 points in his first full season at the OHL level, I think you're talking about a guy that's obviously very highly skilled. And you heard Kyle mention that shift in the third round where, you know, a penalty kill, he killed off a minute 10 of the penalty with his, you know, with his possession time. So really, really reminiscent of like a Mitch Marner type. I did get a quick message from Kyle right now as he popped off the show, and the one comparison he said is Connor Brown is a guy that he'd compare him to.
Okay.
So very interesting, because that's a guy that, again, the Leafs were rumored to be interested in free agency was Connor Brown. Obviously they had him, but a guy that plays a different type of game, maybe not as offensively driven, but definitely a guy that can be in that middle six in terms of, you know, their NHL abilities. So something to keep an eye on as he kind of progresses through the Leafs organization.
I just want to say one quick thing about Cowan for a second. And just sort of like, obviously you're not going to compare him to Mitch Marner at this point, but Mitch Marner only had 59 points in his first full season with the London Knights. And you know what? Obviously Mitch Marner was probably, you know, a little bit younger at that point. Given the talent that he had, he made the jump already. Cowan had a little bit more of a progression there, but you know, if he would have played a full season, he probably could have had 53 points instead of playing in the Go JHL and splitting time between that and the OHL. And then maybe this season probably would have improved his stock a little bit more had points been a factor. But, you know, obviously Cowan is a different player from Marner, but given how Marner only had 59 points to Cowan 53, and again, given how other London Knights had a steady progression afterwards, you could look at him having a big draft +1 season, no doubt about it.
That's it. I'm putting a graphic out there on Instagram. Peter compares Cowan to Marner.
Quotes taken out of context.
Oh man, but yeah. Any other takeaways from the draft as a whole? Not necessarily the first round, but draft as a whole. It could be first round notes that you had coming out of it, just saying, you know, what the heck, or this was a headline. What were your thoughts on the draft, Peter, especially being, you know, feet on the ground?
Yeah, even with the first round, still a lot of uncertainty too. I mean, obviously we saw what Bedard was going first, but then we started to get word that, you know, the Anaheim Ducks were starting to look at Leo Carlsson very hard at number as 2 overall, then Adam Fantilli. And Alex, when I was on your morning show, I thought you got to take Adam Fantilli 2nd overall, and then look what happened. So anything can happen. There's a lot of uncertainty with the draft class, first round, second round, third, because there are even players that dropped. And given how deep it is, we saw players that, you know, moved up, players that moved down, and it was unfortunate. But, you know, there are a lot of other players late in the draft that still have upside, still have potential, still have the ability to, you know, make a name for themselves. And yeah, it was very uncertain throughout, given how, you know, it started off very early on after the Bedard pick, and then it slowly started to increase a little bit more as the first round went on, and then day 2 went on as well.
I'm going to say this. I think that if Leo Carlsson didn't go number 2, my rankings would have been right in the top 3. I think they would have gone Fantilli 2. I think they would have gone Will Smith 3. But I mean, obviously Carlsson kind of shifted that. Anaheim shifted that. Very interesting pick at number 2. I think a lot of people were taken off guard, but I think Carlsson did himself a favor at the combine and just, you know, coming out there, being himself. Obviously the story from Scott Wheeler about him, you know, motivating others, but also inspiring others with, you know, his stutter and whatnot. So I think just the personality of Leo Carlsson also kind of took a step in the right direction in terms of, you know, providing teams with a better idea of who he was as a person outside the game, just like Alex asked Kyle when it came to Easton Cowan. But Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you guys want to hear something hilarious? I was just looking at the first round, and I got 3 total picks in the first round right in my mock draft. Obviously got Connor Bedard right.
Yeah.
And then I got Ryan Leonard to Washington right.
I got that one right too.
And then for some reason, I got David Edstrom to Vegas with the 32nd pick right. Those 3 picks. And then as soon as the Blue Jackets took Leo Carlsson second overall, my entire draft was fucked. So
it's like March Madness, right? Like,
Yeah.
you
There
know,
goes
as
your
soon as that
bracket, you know?
16 beats 1, you're just like, there goes my entire year. But Alex, any big takeaways from the draft for you? It doesn't have to be first round. It could just be, something of note that you didn't see coming in.
No, I mean, I thought that the draft, I thought that in the first round, there were a lot of surprises. I think the first round kind of reminded me of, the 2018 draft where I was shocked to see the Habs take Kotkaniemi 3rd overall. And then but while I was still recovering from that, the Arizona Coyotes came up and took Barrett Hayton 5th overall. So I saw a lot of surprises like that in the first round. I was not expecting David Reinbacher to go to the Habs 5th overall. Certainly was not expecting Dmitry Simashev to go to the Coyotes 6th overall. I think that's why I draw that comparison there between that and 2018, because they're just back to back, just 2 picks that I didn't see coming. But overall, no, I think the draft after that pretty much checked out. I got to be honest, I can't really speak on what happened in much of the 2nd to 7th round because I was out of the house for a lot of the draft while it was happening. So I caught the Leafs the Leafs final 2 picks there with Hudson Malinowski and then, oh boy, is
Noah Chadwick.
I was thinking Andrew Chadwick, and I was like, nope, I'm thinking that because Noah Chadwick reminds me a lot of Andrew Nielsen when the Leafs drafted him. Mostly just because they're both 6'3" and both played for the Lethbridge Hurricanes. But hopefully he turns out to be a little bit better than Andrew Nielsen. But overall, wouldn't say I have any crazy takeaways from the draft. I did learn about the story behind Hudson Malinowski and how, he probably shouldn't be at the draft right now. It's a pretty crazy story. Cliff Notes version for anyone who doesn't know, he fell off a roof when he was 17 years old and almost died. Had to take some time off to recover. And so he's probably a year behind in his development. So was a little confused to see the Leafs take a junior A player, an overage junior A player in the 5th round. I was like, some other players probably make a little more sense there. But then I read up on that story and I'm like, okay, once again, this goes to show why I am a fan commentating at home and I'm not on the scouting staff for the Leafs. So overall, pretty solid drafts. Looking forward to seeing what comes of their other prospects. But I got to say, I got a lot more to say on free agency than I do the draft this year.
Yeah, there you go. I love that story on Malinowski as well. I think he was ranked a little higher than where he went, and I think that is a testament to maybe the player that he can be. He's got a pretty high ceiling, so I'm interested to see how he develops over time as well. But yeah, I mean, shock and awe in that first round. I don't think there's any question there. I hope having Kyle on today kind of puts a little bit of rest to that, and we'll see moving forward. But as you said, free agency was a little bit more newsworthy in terms of what the Leafs did, what the Leafs didn't do, what other teams did. Just before we get to that, though, just a quick word from our other sponsors, DraftKings. New customers, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. Bet just $5 to score $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's code THPN only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Massachusetts, call 800-327-5050 or visit gamblinghelplinema.org. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Kansas, call 1-800-522-4700 on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort. In West Virginia, gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. All games regulated by the West Virginia Lottery. Please play responsibly in partnership with Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 21 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. One boost per eligible game, opt-in required, max bet $50, 10+ leg required for 100% boost. Eligibility, wagering, and deposit restrictions apply. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/baseball terms. So, boys, free agency. Day one, I was a little bit speechless. Not much coming from the Leafs. Obviously, Ryan Reeves was the big name. John Klingberg, which, you know, you talk to my father-in-law, and John Klingberg was the biggest mistake the Leafs could have made. He's not a big Klingberg fan, considering the downgrade he had over the last couple of seasons. But 1 year, not terrible, not terrible. Alex, let's throw it to you first. Day one was quiet for the Leafs. Day two, a lot louder. Your thoughts on free agency so far for Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Yeah. Day one, I think a lot of people were feeling dejected on day one. I'm not going to lie. When I found out that Ryan Reeves was the only name that the Leafs had been connected to, and then to see that they gave him 3 years at over $1 million per year, I was not feeling too good about that. Of course, in saying that, I knew that even as I was criticizing the signing, that as soon as he opened his mouth to the media, I was going to love him. So, it is what it is. He's there for the vibes. He's there for the locker room, and he's there to drop the gloves every now and then. I can get over it. The Klingberg signing, I think a little higher on it than most people are. I think a lot of people forget about just how bad the Ducks were last year. And, you know, to spend your whole season with a team that's nowhere near competing for the playoffs, and then to go to a team that's I won't say on the cusp, because they were pretty comfortably in a playoff spot, but to go to a team like Minnesota where, you know, you're only spending the second half of the season, a couple games, and then the playoffs there. I feel like it can be hard for a guy like Klingberg to get settled in, especially considering how long he spent playing for the Stars before that. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of people are underestimating what he can bring on a team like the Leafs, who thrive on offense and generally need some more puck movers from the back end. I think he can come and take a little bit of the weight off of Morgan Rielly. And I heard some people compare Klingberg to Tyson Barrie, and I kind of get it, because he's offense first, he's right-handed, and he's not good defensively. People forget that when Barrie was in Toronto, he spent the first 20 games of the season getting forced into a defensive role by Mike Babcock next to
third pairing too.
Yeah, he was put on the shutdown pairing with Jake Muzzin, and it did not work for him. And then even after Babcock was fired and Sheldon Keefe came in, Keefe starts putting him alongside a Morgan Rielly, and it's like neither of those guys are good defensively. So all I'm going to say is that Tyson Barrie never had someone like Jake McCabe to play alongside. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. I think Klingberg, I'd probably honestly start him on the first power play unit. I think that he's got a bit more of a presence in terms of his shot. And
he gets through.
They do get through. And no offense to Morgan Rielly, not a lot of those ones get through. But overall, I think day one was all right. Day two, I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to let one of you guys take over for day two, and then I'll chime in afterwards.
Peter, take it away, buddy. What did you think of free agency? Touch on day one if you want to get into day two.
Yeah, I brief recap for day one. Wasn't a big fan. I don't mind the term for Reeves, actually. The contract or the value, 1.3, is still a little bit high, but you know what? Totally understandable, but I wouldn't give that much for a fourth liner. Klingberg, I do agree, brought him for offense, get shots through, be more of an offensive presence, trying to alleviate some of that pressure off Morgan Rielly, I think, because I think they were relying on him too much. Having another strong puck-moving defenseman is going to be good, especially if he is going to be in a top four role. Power play one. I do agree that he does get shots through. That's going to be huge, whether it's on net, second or third opportunities in front of the net. I think that's going to be key for the Maple Leafs going forward, because he had 10 goals. The next highest on the Maple Leafs would have been Timothy Liljegren with 6. So you got to get a guy who could get pucks on net, and he could do that. But for day two, yeah, it definitely was, because day two was just the Tyler Bertuzzi one, and then day three was the Max Domi one. But we could talk about both of them. It doesn't matter to me. But yeah, the Bertuzzi one was definitely one that needed to happen. I'm surprised that was the direction that they were going for a top six forward, because when an opportunity for a top six forward to try and sign him, Maple Leafs are nowhere to be seen. You know, they've been relatively quiet, and now 1 year, 5.5. Think Bertuzzi wanted term as well, but I think with a lot of players and a lot of teams, it just didn't quite work out because we know like the cap is going to go up next year. He's probably betting on himself, but I think that this is a possibility that if he does well this season, depending on what happens with William Nylander, big asterisk / question mark, what have you, if Nylander still commands too much and they decide to move him, that opens up a lot of money for Tyler Bertuzzi to try and resign if you do decide to give him $6-7 million, because this is another bet on himself kind of year right now. And given how well he played with the Bruins in the playoffs, being that player to try and tread the line, not cross it, be an agitator and a pest, plus still have that skill that'll complement Matthews and Marner, I think that's absolutely huge. And we saw what happened with Bunting, how he lost favor with the referees and the officiating and getting calls against them and complaining a lot. If you brought Bunting back at the same value, it probably would not end well. And I think I'd rather have Bertuzzi at $5.5 million than Bunting at his current contract with Carolina at this point. But yeah, Bertuzzi brings a lot to the table. Transitional play, good speed, good hands, great shot on net as we saw during the playoffs with the Bruins. And the fact that he's able to elevate his play with top tier players, that's something to look forward to. Boston had a strong top six. Toronto has a strong top six, so I assume he's going to be on that top line with Matthews and Marner. And if he's looking forward to that challenge, I'm pretty sure he's going to rise to the occasion and put up the points, because this is a guy that has shown to do it in the past. Injuries got in the way. I think right now, if he maintains his health, he's going to be a big part of this top six.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that the Leafs at one point were linked to both of these free agents. And normally you see them maybe go out and get one. They went out and got both. And on 1 year deals, there has been conversation about Max Domi wanting to be in Toronto long term. Mm-hmm. There has already been conversation or rumors, let's say, of a potential extension for Tyler Bertuzzi when the year is up.
And he does have a no movement clause too.
He does. And the Leafs will know more about their financial state and the cap state as the season progresses as well. So it's interesting to keep that in mind. On top of that, I think it's safe to say that the Maple Leafs just became one of the most hated teams in the NHL. You get Ryan Reeves.
They weren't before?
Well, I mean on the ice, not just off the ice.
Oh, okay.
Off the ice, they're hated by like 31 other cities. Mm-hmm. On the ice, though, now you've got Ryan Reeves, you got Tyler Bertuzzi, you have Max Domi. And I mean, let's throw Jake McCabe in there as somebody you can throw the body around as well and kind of play a feisty role. So a lot of hatred's going to come towards the Leafs, I think, in terms of the on-ice product as well. I love the signings. I love the 1 year term. I love looking at it and saying, look, the cap's going to go up next year. We know where we're going to be at. And part of that too comes with comments that were made by Matthews shortly after we finished our last episode, boys. And that was that Matthews potentially wants to take less money, less contract value to help the Leafs build a team around him. That's something we've talked about on this show for 2 seasons now, is that Boston mentality and trying to make sure that you put yourself in a position that you can build a winning product. And Alex, I'll throw it to you first. Is this a way to look at Matthews and say, hey, maybe we can get 8 years out of this guy and build a contender for those entire 8 years, now that we know that he wants to take a little less value to build that contender on the ice?
I mean, I would hope that that's the case. I don't know how much I'm going to trust that. I mean, maybe this is just because I'm still used to Matthew, you know. For the past year, all we've heard is Matthews is going to take, he's going to max his salary and take 3 years, or he's going to do 5 years at the most. He's never going to consider 8 years. And now, you know, there's speculation. Maybe there is a chance they get him for 8 years. Overall, I think the Leafs just need to sign him. And honestly, if it comes to 5 years, I'm fine with that, because if the Leafs don't make any ground in the next 5 years, his contract is up again, and he's going into his 30s. I think by that point, I'd be ready to move on anyways. So I think that I think he's certainly got a case to be able to command a hefty raise from the 11.6 he was making before. And if there is any merit to that, I think that could potentially be a turning point for the Leafs, because, you look at the acquisitions of guys like Domi, and, he could play either in the top 6, the bottom 6, or the middle 6. And when you look at the Leafs last year from the start of the year, so I'm not including after they traded for Ryan O'Reilly, and actually O'Reilly was the only one that really brought any offense, so just him. But when you look at their depth scoring options throughout most of the year, it was the core 4, and then Bunting, and then it went right down to Calle Järnkrok. And with no disrespect to Calle Järnkrok, he scored 20 goals last year. I think that the Leafs recognize that they need to approach this season with a little bit of a different plan beyond just, let the core 4 carry the majority of the offense and then other guys can chip in when they want. I think that having Domi and Järnkrok as bona fide options in the bottom 6, assuming Matthew Knies makes a jump as well, I think that their secondary scoring is going to be a little better this year. And I would hope that Matthew sees that. And it's not just for their secondary scoring, it's for improving defense. It's for giving your goaltender a raise. It's for everything, because ultimately the best teams aren't the ones where their stars are maxing them out for every penny that they have. And I'm not going to try and make a big generalization and say that every single cup team in the past has stars that have taken less, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I think that at bare minimum, you're not looking at teams going out and on long cup runs with headlines like, oh, is he going to command the league maximum in salary on his next contract? Like, when you hear about teams that go far in the playoffs, you never hear about their contract situations until afterwards. So I would hope that Matthews, I'm as big a believer in players getting their bag as much as possible. I think he deserves a hefty raise, but it would be a really nice surprise to see if he decided to take less.
Peter, even if it isn't the case and he ends up getting, the maximum, to hear him come out and say something like that is got to be a little bit of a blessing in disguise for the Leafs, especially in the conversations that they're having with William Nylander right now, because damn well if Matthews is willing to take less, kind of sets the bar a little bit for William Nylander when it comes to the Maple Leafs.
Absolutely. And I remember seeing that tweet about, Frank Seravalli going on SN 590 and talking about that. I'm like, that's pretty big and telling, that if your star player is going to do whatever it takes to say, listen, I'm not aiming to be the highest paid player. I just want what's best for the team right now. That sets the tone for everybody else that's going to be in a contract situation. Now, with Nylander, it is a bit of a different situation because he already took less on his first contract because of what initially happened. Now I understand that he's asking for $10 million. He deserves a bit of a pay raise, but the Maple Leafs, that's too rich for them. I think $8-9 million, given their current cap situation, it should be relatively reasonable, but he has earned the right to earn $10 million. I mean, he's been very productive the last 2 seasons, back-to-back 80-point seasons, 40 goals this one, or in last season in 22-23. It's unfortunate because he said, well, why? I could understand maybe why would Nylander want to take back-to-back pay cuts when he already did one. We're already seeing that with Matthews. Maybe Marner does take a bit of a cutback as well. Maybe you try and increase Nylander's value on the next contract. If they're trying to work something out where maybe the first year isn't as great and then it bumps up in years 2, 3, and 4, maybe you could try and work something out if it's an 8-year deal for Nylander. But it is a rough situation, and it's a different one for sure because Matthews has already stated where his position is. Nylander has stated his, and you know what? It's totally different for both players, but if Matthews is taking less, then maybe everybody else should at this point. Granted, Nylander has already been, on the wrong side of it once, but we'll see what happens. But all in all, a good sign that Matthews is leading by example and saying, you know what, winning is more important than money at this point. And Alex talked about, the Boston mentality. That's what you want to see at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that Nylander, if he decides to go the money route, I mean, obviously he's deserving of a big pay grade. We all know that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the guy's earned $38 million so far in his career. I think it's safe to say that the money's there. If at some point players want to win, this is the time to do it. Mm-hmm. I think it's you've got so many guys in the prime of their career right now. They've got to figure out a way to get it done. So hopefully we see Nylander kind of take that mentality in as well as Matthews, and we can get something done. Marner again next year. And there's a lot of conversation around what this team could look like in 2 to 3 years. But
one more quick point, I just want to add on Nylander too. The difference between Nylander and Matthews, I mean Nylander's, Marner, and Matthews is Matthews and Marner have the hardware, or not necessarily Marner, but like they have accolades and award nominations to go with their play. Nylander really hasn't been nominated for any accolades or anything, awards and all that. So right now you're probably looking at Matthews and Marner still probably going to earn most of the paychecks. But I think that could be a case if you're the Maple Leafs. Well, Matthews and Marner are up for awards and stuff. Nylander really isn't. I think that's one way you could go for the negotiations, but it's still probably not going to end very well no matter what.
Worth noting as well, even though he should have been this year, Nylander's never been an all-star either.
He should have. Exactly. Yeah.
If you want to add that into the conversation, I'm not going to be that guy, but I did just put it out there into the universe as well.
Yeah.
But one of the notes that was made in free agency, and whether it's rumor mill, BS, or what have you, is that Ryan O'Reilly did not want to sign with the Leafs despite their best efforts to get him re-signed because of the culture in the room. And some of the conversation around that is that, well, hey, we brought in Ryan Reeves. He's an outspoken guy. He likes to throw the team parties. He likes to be a host. He likes to do this. He likes to do this. He likes to bring the team together. Peter, does this room have a cancer or bad culture, or is it just maybe what Elliot Friedman said on 32 Thoughts recently, that maybe O'Reilly just didn't like being, having the media integrated into his life as much in Toronto, and that's why he went south to Nashville? What are your thoughts on that?
I'd probably go with the latter, him not wanting to be in the spotlight, because a lot of players maybe aren't up for that, and I totally understand that. We saw how well, or not really how well, but how Phil Kessel was like treated in the media, how he wasn't really up for that, but still went out and produced no matter what with his time with the Maple Leafs. I think that I don't think there's a locker room issue or a cancer or toxic situation in there. I just think they need to get out of their shell a little bit more. They need to be a little bit more laid back, a little bit more outgoing, kind of like Ryan Reeves, kind of like Tyler Bertuzzi, kind of like Max Domi at this point, where, I can't remember where I read it, but I think there was stories where some players were kind of separated from the team group activities and stuff like that. They're in their hotel room. They're doing something else. There's not a lot of team bonding kind of thing. I think you got to do more of that, because if you're just sitting around in your hotel room, you're on your own and everyone else is having a good time, then what does that say about the character of the team right now? You got to get them out of their shell. You got to get them a little bit more acclimated with the mentality that you want. You want them to be outgoing. You want them to be into it. You want them to be a part of everything. I think that's going to be very huge. And that's why they went after guys like Reeves, where he does like to do all the planning. You go after guys like, again, Reeves, Bertuzzi, and Domi for the on-ice character as well, with their mentality of playing to win. I don't think that they're as soon as it first came out, everyone was making a big deal of it. I would say this too, even myself. When I saw that, I'm like, ooh, that's not very good if that is the case. But, O'Reilly said that he had nothing but good things about the locker room. Everyone that left said that they had nothing but good things about the locker room. So I think we could try and cut that out of the, problematic rumor mill kind of thing. But I do think that the Maple Leafs need to be a little bit more engaging in terms of their mindset and mentality.
Alex, your thoughts on the rumor mill of the cancer in the Leafs locker room?
Yeah, I was concerned about that too when I read it, but I also couldn't really comment on it because it was right when Elon decided to impose that view limit. And so I was also, can I just say, Musk, go fuck yourself for doing that on July 1st. I know you don't care. I know that you're off on some boat in the fucking Middle East or whatever, but in the Indian Ocean, but don't do that, man. You know what July, you got to know what July 1st means to us. Anyways, sorry, I just had to get that off my chest.
You're speaking for every hockey fan out there, buddy.
Well, because I woke up on Saturday morning, I'm like, let's go. I cannot wait to just sit down and take in like as much hockey media as I can. And then as soon as I pull out my phone in the morning, as I wake up, it's your rate limit's been exceeded. It's like, are you kidding me, man?
I just logged in. I'm just hoping it up. What happened?
Anyways, so sorry, I had to remember what the question was because I just used that to completely lambast Elon Musk.
Locker room.
Yep, I got
issue.
it.
Yep.
I got it. So when I was certainly concerned when I read about that, but I think as soon as it was debunked, like I think at that point you can put everything to rest. I don't think O'Reilly I don't think there was a locker room cancer. I don't think he left because there was a culture issue. I know people want to paint it that way because people want to paint it in a light where, you know, the core four doesn't care. It's a country club atmosphere, and guys like O'Reilly wanted to win. And because there was a country club atmosphere, he left and he didn't want to come back, and that's why he signed in Nashville. And I know that a lot of people want that to be the case because of the clicks that they can get about the Leafs having a country club issue and how an established veteran like Ryan O'Reilly. It's one of those, we use a term in news reporting where it's like, it's like news that tugs at your heartstrings, but you click on it because you know it'll make you angry, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that it was published that way for a reason, but I don't think that was the case. And I think now that he's come out, and not him specifically, but I think now that it's come out that, you know, he didn't have any issue playing in Toronto, you know, Sherliving made a good point where if you're from Toronto, sometimes it can mean the world. It's not always that case. Mm-hmm. And if you're in Ryan O'Reilly's shoes, you get to go and live in Nashville full time around the year. You get to play in a role where you're probably going to be one of the top dogs of the Predators offense. And you get to live kind of out of the spotlight. I think for, you know, we always make a big deal about Ontario born players coming back to play for the Leafs. And some people get here and they bask in it. Guys like Mark Giordano, guys like Jason Spezza, guys who got like Max Domi, guys who come home. And I know Max Domi's not an Ontario boy, but either way, some guys from Toronto and Ontario come home and it's a big deal for them. It's the childhood dream. They get to be in Toronto forever. It's not like that for everyone, plain and simple. And O'Reilly, you know, he was great when he was with the team. I would have liked to see him back for that number, but you can't force something on him if he doesn't want it. And if he wants to go to Nashville and play a bigger role there for the same amount of money, maybe live in a bit of a warmer climate, good for him. Let him do that. I don't think it makes him a locker room cancer. I don't think it means the Leafs have a locker room cancer. I think that the only thing there is really to be said about their locker room is that it's quiet, like Treliving said. And so that's why you bring in guys like Reeves and like Bertuzzi and like Domi, etc. So that's kind of where I stand. I think that just the minute that it gets clarified that O'Reilly didn't leave because there's a culture issue in Toronto, I think we got to put that to bed.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that I think sometimes later in players' careers too, they don't mind the anonymity of playing in a place like Nashville. Not saying that you don't get noticed, but I remember when I was down there for the All-Star game a few years back, and you know, Roman Yossi's walking Broadway like it's nothing. And it's just it gives you that ability to kind of stay amongst the people without immediately being recognized, and I think that's part of it as well. So, yeah, I mean. I think it was bullshit from the get-go. I get that it's more of a quiet room. You see a lot of these guys that are maybe more focused on some of the outside things. You got, you know, Matthews, who's friends with Bieber and probably Bass and some of the Toronto culture. You got Marner, who's got his family close by. You've got Nylander, who does his thing. Like, there's a little bit more of like that individuality on this team. But that's what you get when you get stars and at their age and growing up together, and they have their own thing. So I think bringing in a guy like Reeves does add to that, does play a part in maybe developing more of that team mentality, more of that team culture. And I think we will see that a little bit more this season too. So, you know, I'm with you, Alex. I think it sucks to see Ryan O'Reilly go. I think he added a bunch to that team in the short time that he was there. But, you know, you like you said, you can't force it on anybody. And he obviously wanted to play somewhere where, you know, maybe he has a little bit more of a role. He's not playing on the third line, maybe playing out of his comfort zone. And the focus isn't on him either. So, yeah, it's definitely something to consider. But aside from that, guys, I I don't know. Where do you see this team going with the moves that they made? You think they're done, or what do you think's going to happen here, Alex?
Well, there's going to be more moves. I don't think there's any secret there. I mean, they're $8 million over the cap right now. Obviously, that's before they put Muzzin on the LTIR and before they find a home for Matt Murray and all that jazz. But they still got to re-sign Ilya Samsonov. They still need to figure out what the direction of their defense is, because I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys caught that quote from Klingberg's press conference yesterday, where he said that apparently Treliving, after the Bertuzzi and Domi signings, said, hey, there's still some work for me to be done here. Like, I feel like you don't say that to a defenseman you just signed unless you're specifically talking about the defense. I mean, unless Treliving wants to confide in John Klingberg, of all people, a secret about the Matt Murray negotiations or whatever, then no. So I think there's still work to be done. I wonder if we see another move for a defenseman. I know Brett Pesce's name has been out there a lot. I certainly hope that upgrading the defense doesn't have to come at the expense of trading William Nylander, but I do think that's something that fans should be keeping their eye on over the rest of the summer. But as it stands right now, and I saw a really good point, I can't remember who said this, but I think what's important for Leafs fans to remember is that you can't compare a team at the end of the year to a team at the start of the next season, because because that doesn't factor in the trade deadline coming up in 2024. That doesn't factor in any moves that get made between now and the start of the season. And while, it's easy to look at the lineup from the playoffs and say, oh, they lost O'Reilly, they lost Achari, they lost Shen, they lost pretty much every single player they acquired besides the ones with term, and guys like Bunting, Kerfoot, and Hall. It's easy to look at that lineup and say, hey, this team is a severe downgrade from there. I think if you compare the lineup that they have right now to the lineup that started last season, I feel pretty optimistic heading into this year. And, we already touched on it. Tyler Bertuzzi, I think, is going to be a massive part of this team. I think that, and I saw a savvy article, in fact, from Jim Parsons over at the Hockey Writers about how, the Leafs could have potentially, played a slick hand here. And, you signed Bertuzzi to a 1-year deal right before the cap rises by $4 million. Maybe he's a guy you talk about signing long-term, depending on how this year goes. Either that, or he gets to cash out and get paid way too much money by another team. So I think that the team heading into the season is better than the team that headed into last season. And I think once we get to the trade deadline, we're going to be seeing one of the better Leafs teams we've ever seen. And that's provided Treliving does more of what he did on day 2 and kind of in the later hours of day 1 of free agency. But I think that for now, at least, he's kind of won over the trust of a lot of fans. And while there is still time for him to make bad moves, he's already potentially made a few. I think we just got to wait and see what he does. But I'm feeling pretty good about where the team's at right now.
Peter, how are you feeling going into the remainder of this offseason? Are we looking at a better Leaf team when we kick off 2023-24?
Yeah, again, anything is possible for what can happen, because you make the necessary moves. You added a top 6, you added some middle 6 help with Domi, you added essentially obviously Justin Hall being gone, you added a more improved puck moving defenseman, but still bad defensive defenseman in John Klingberg, but he's brought in to be, offense, right? So if kind of like Alex, if he is paired up with the Jake McCabe, I think that kind of offsets everything. You made the necessary moves to try and improve your team. Obviously, majority of the moves or holes were up front. So obviously you bring in 3 key forwards that have some edge, combination of edge, skill, grit, determination, drive, what have you. The big thing for me is if you still go back into next season with Matt Murray as your backup and he still is healthy, as much as I've been riding the Matt Murray trade and trying to hope for a bounce back, what happened towards the tail end of last season, that's an indicator where you either trade him or put him on Robida Island. Same situation, kind of like with Jake Muzzin. I think we've seen the last of Jake Muzzin. I don't. Yeah. If you're making all these moves where you add another defenseman, you're adding the money, because Bertuzzi is 5.5, Muzzin is 5.625 if I'm not mistaken. If you're giving up that much money and you're $8 million over the cap, and combined Matt Murray and Jake Muzzin are 5.6, 4.6. I'm just going to be safe and say combined 13 million or close to 13 million. That's a good indication that they probably know that they're not going to return. Or if you move Matt Murray, you at least alleviate and shed that contract off. But I think that they made the necessary moves they needed to make. Whether that obviously day one kind of left a sour taste in everyone's mouth because of that's all. But then you get the Domi, you get the Bertuzzi, you get two top names in the free agent class, which is very big. I think that they did make the necessary moves. It's just a matter of seeing how the on-ice product is going to gel together and play next season. That to me is going to be the big one.
Well, boys, it'll be exciting to see what happens over the next couple months as we head into the second half of the offseason. Free agency still in full force. Lots of money being thrown around by lots of teams, including Kyle Dubas and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Quick shout out to Phil Kessel on the hot dog eating contest day. So Joey Chestnut will do his best to Phil the Thrill impersonation as he goes for yet another title in the hot dog eating contest. Before we close out here, though, boys, anything else you wanted to add for this week on Sticks in the Six?
I got nothing to add. I was going to try and think of something funny to say there, but no, I got nothing to add.
Peter, anything you got going, buddy?
Just grading the 4 contracts that the Maple Leafs gave out over at THW. Other than that, yeah.
Well, as you mentioned, Alex, in our little prelude there, you're heading to the Weezer concert tonight. You enjoy that.
Yes, sir. It's going to be hot.
It's going to be hot. Big shout out to our new sponsor as well, SeatGeek. So if you're looking for tickets to a concert, if you're looking for tickets to a sporting event, check out SeatGeek. Use promo code STICKSINTHE6. That's STICKSINTHE6IX. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. So be sure to check them out over at SeatGeek. Otherwise, boys, we'll touch base again next week for episode 130 of the podcast.